welcome and thank you all for coming. And we got a little bit of a preview earlier with some county officials, and I'm telling you, this is going to be very exciting and interesting and new. And you already knew that. And I've actually convinced myself I'm not going to tell you what a great speaker Duany is, because he's going to show you what a great speaker he is. However, there's a couple of things that I have to say. I've never done this before, but I've been handed a script by my son. And he's right to demand that I do this. The first thing is, we want to thank the Anchorage Foundation of Texas for making this series possible, Distinguished Speaker Series. We've had now, I think, 11 speakers in the series. And they've been some pretty great people who have brought us some pretty great stuff, and I know a lot of you have been at those events, and I think it's elevating the level of discussion in Houston, which we view as our job at Houston Tomorrow. And so what I have to say to you tonight is that this is the part of the year where we run out of money always, and so we start our fundraising campaign, and so you're going to be hearing from us pretty soon. And I hope that when you do hear from us, you'll say, oh yeah, that was great, that's terrific, I'm going to support that. And I want to talk about something new that we've just gotten another grant from the Anchorage Foundation of Houston to do, that will need a lot more support too. And I'll just read the script. We've received seed funding of $15,000 from Anchorage to begin a program that we've been working on for a long time. It's called HoustonNeighborhoods.org. And this project is going to be a website. We'll develop an open source blogging sort of system in which neighborhood civic associations will be able to put up a website for themselves without having to know how to do that, or, as many of you who probably work on these things over time know, that once your website guy goes away, you're lost, for several years. So this will be something where anybody can maintain this website, and it will be contained in a sort of big HoustonNeighborhoods.org website where there will be connections of what's happening in this neighborhood will become apparent to people in other neighborhoods. There'll be a news feed that will go on here, and so you can either do your own website for your civic association and kind of ignore all that, or you can get involved with other neighborhoods around the region and start to see how our issues are the same or are different, or how we can come together. And so the purpose is to build community. Our big job here, we think, is to build community. And Andres tonight will tell you that that's his personal driving factors: sociability, people talking together and having fun together and getting things done. So part of what we're going to do is develop 100 Friends of Houston Neighborhoods campaign, where we'll ask people to put up $1,000 to become one of those 100 people. And with it, we'll build one of the most interesting websites, I think, that in any metropolitan region in the United States. And we've had now a little over a year of experience with this in our website, which is one of those kinds of websites. And if you're following it, you can see that it changes every day. And we have 4 or 5 people who know nothing about HTML and all that stuff, who feed this thing every day and produce this great website. So that's the kind of thing we want to make available, is something where we can all, as citizens, input stuff that we can all share without having to go hire somebody to be a web programmer or something. So when that thing arrives in the mail, or however you get it, I hope you'll be responsive. This stuff is very expensive to do, and we're one of the lowest funded organizations in town, and I think, considering the amount of this sort of civic dialogue we cook up, we need your support, we need your help. So there you go. I hope you'll consider investing in this Houston Tomorrow this year, and I hope none of you will mention to Jay that I didn't actually read the script. So, I said I wasn't going to try to describe what a great speaker he is, and I won't, but I'll tell you, this is one of the original thinkers. This is a guy who changes constantly, who is constantly finding new things to be passionate about, and it's always in the same direction. And he gives people tools, and he gives people insights, and he gives people ways to approach how we all live together that are mind-boggling and wonderful. So that's enough. Andres Duany, come tell us how this works.
Okay, his own machinery in place. I don't think I need to tell you that David Crossley is also wonderful. Yeah. And he is one of the great force multipliers. You know, he takes whatever there is and just translates and expands it and so forth. And I get the feeling this time that there's a kind of a tipping point in Houston. And I picked this up because, well, you know, there's hard evidence. There's the transit and the park that works and the building downtown. But above all, in these little snippets of conversation that have had 2 days, is generally people are complaining about the right things and liking the right things. You know, they're bemoaning suburbia and loving whatever bits you have of this kind of urbanism that we should all love. Now, David told me something very dangerous, which is whatever you want as long as you want. And I'm a marathon runner of speeches, but I won't punish you that way. There are a few things, though. It's almost impossible to get across in one presentation, you know, the issues. And almost always when I give a presentation, people think, oh, that was quite good. I say I should have actually given the other one. And they're really two types. There are the ones that are really, really very broad about the concepts, you know, the overall concepts. And many of you have heard that kind of presentation, and it has to do contrasting decisively suburban sprawl and traditional urbanism and the difference that it makes at every level. From a personal point of view, from the time you wake up in the morning as a child, to the time that you go to bed as an adult. You know, what it's like morning and night, how you expend your time, how you expend your funds, how you can also give a lecture on what it does to your health that actually can hold you for an hour. You can give another one, what it does to nature, you know, why it consumes land. What I'm most emotional about right now is the experience of coming back from Abu Dhabi, and then the experience of having been to Hobby Airport last night. And I have to describe it because it's like two different universes. And when I arrived, we were just been surprised in Abu Dhabi, and I hate going there. You know, it's long, it's, you know, you're a servant, essentially. You know how that is. But when you arrive in Etihad Airline, which, by the way, all the stewardesses are exquisitely beautiful. They're charming for 18 hours at a stretch. And when you arrive, there's a Mercedes-Benz white assigned to you with a chauffeur, okay, on business class. It's just there, and it knows you, and it takes you to the hotel. Arriving at Hobby Airport last night at midnight was the most astonishing experience. There was a cattle drive of people. There were only 5 decrepit taxis in all of Houston, apparently. There were people who don't speak English actually shoving us with bars into taxis that were going in approximately the right direction. There was no individual service, you understand? It's like 5 at a time. You're going in the Pasadena direction? Here. You're going downtown, very broadly described downtown. Good luck. And all these essential suckers would get in 5 and 6 at a time at midnight to go to some place in the approximate. I waited till all 30 people were gone and said, I'm going to take the last taxi and I'm going to go alone. And of course, they couldn't find the address. They couldn't find, I knew that it was near a museum. They couldn't find the museum. If I didn't have my iPhone GPS, I don't know what I would have done at midnight. That kind of contrast is all too common, okay? And the reason is that we're taking the accumulated wealth of the United States of 300 years and shoveling it over there $3 billion a year, just like that. wham, the accumulated wealth. Oh, the work of my grandparents, wham. You know, the great success of industrialization, let's just shove it over there. You don't know what $300 billion is till you see what it buys. Okay, and that's what really gets you. It just gets you. You know what the transit is like, their ability to fix their city. I want to say one thing. The only thing I knew that we were doing right is sending them some really bad planning ideas. I said, good. We're going to these hideous ideas, we're going to screw them. No one will want to live there. And we'll retain some proportion of the young talent. Because they just won't be able to recruit. Well, I mean, here's the really bad news. They did that for one generation. Right now, the planning is superb. It's all new urbanism, beginning to end. And anything that didn't work before, I was fixing things for the capital city, Alain. And anything I wanted down, they would buy and demolish. Anything. Roads too wide? Yes, sir. Just tell us, you know, what you want. And it's like that. I want bigger trees, like this, buy this, whatever, no problem. And it isn't just top-down planning, okay? It isn't just, well, you know, of course the sheik can tell anybody what to do. It's wealth, okay? And I think we need to focus on the fact that even if you don't believe in climate change, and even if you do but you think it's too far off, or even if you don't think that we're running on a farmland, whatever it is, that you, for some reason you think that urbanism is not important, just think about the national pauperization, okay, what is happening to the wealth of this country because of our urban pattern. Because in the end and in the beginning, it's the lifestyle of the American middle class that is breaking our back. Okay? Now Houston, of course, is less affected because you get some of the wealth here. Okay? But honestly, if you have a shred of patriotism, we need to do our urbanism different. And it is really, you can see that actually I'm actually angry. I'm actually angry, and it's urgent. It's really urgent. We can't afford it. We can't afford any of it. So, I got that off my chest. Now, about the kinds of lectures. They're the broad ones, and then there are the ones that are in depth. And a couple of days ago, I was in Sacramento, and they are so. Californians are really something else. It really must be invented there, or it's, they're not interested. They're very vague about the existence of any other place. And so that lecture had to be very superficial. And I somehow intuited this because they were really kind of, you know, the conversations before the lecture, they were kind of in kindergarten. And so I came up with something that they got. And I'm going to repeat what I told them. And I said, look, the kind of places that we need to do are connected, right? They need to be somewhat near existing urbanism or connected by transit, okay? They need to be compact. We don't waste land, you know? And so far as the market will bear it, you make a compact place. They need to be complete, you know? Within some modicum of walkability, you need your daily needs, the shops of your daily needs, the workplace of your daily needs, perhaps ideally the schools for your children. In other words, your daily needs should be with walking distance as a civil right. Okay, as a civil right. You should not be making places in, well, they totally got into this. Remember, these are people that every square inch of California has to be handicapped accessible. Every square inch, they'll take anything down that doesn't work. Handicapped accessible, what if you can't get there in the first place? What if the 50% of people who don't drive in America, because they're too young, too old, or too poor, can't even get there? You know, what does it matter if 1% can't go up the 8-inch step, when 50% can't even get there? It's a matter of civil right. They got that. You know, the right to not own a car, they understood. The yearly fine, the $9,000 taxation that it involves having to have a car just to be an adult is the problem. They got that. And then there is, I talk about complexity. Completeness and complexity, you know, which has to do with a range of housing. And I always start with the school. Everybody agrees that schools have to be good. I said, you know, what good does it do to have housing Don't you, and I must speak of affordable housing, I say, don't you think you need housing for your elementary school teachers? Starting salary, shouldn't that be shouldn't that be the test? And then I say, don't you think that the school needs a janitor? Like, who's gonna mop it up at night? Should they commute? And what about the superintendent? Don't you think that somebody who rises in the system should also be able to live nearby? Wouldn't it be nice if the superintendent were in the same community? Well, lo and behold, you need housing for people at the janitor level, the school teacher level, and by the way, don't forget the rich people, because the rich people are just as hard to get. Because the poor people, in fact, will go where told. Oh, I found affordable housing, that's fine. The hard part is how do you get the rich people to move in any kind of integrated way, and that's complexity. And then the last one is it has to be convivial. Okay? It has to be pleasant to be in. Don't underestimate that. Because a lot of planning goes on in which they take aerial photographs of a shopping center plus a housing subdivision plus an apartment cluster plus an office park. And they say, whoa, isn't that jobs, housing, shops, etc. But when you're there, when you're in a place like that, you know what I'm talking about, there's lots of it in Texas, shopping centers, housing subdivisions, you wouldn't walk from one to the other. Within a parking lot, you drive from one end of the shopping center to the other. So it also has to be convivial. We Americans are very demanding in terms of what the environment is like. We expect it to be comfortable, we're spoiled, we even expect it to be interesting. And that is what the word convivial exactly means. So I spoke about that, and they thought it was terrific. Sudden clarity. Now, you're past that. That's the horizontal lecture. Now let's do the vertical. I'm going to take one part, just one part of what we're doing now, which is agricultural urbanism, and do it in the full depth. And it's going to bring in several things. One is the technical expertise, the economic reality, which is typical of the new urbanism, and the marketing. We do not force anybody into anything. And that's one of the reasons that I think the new urbanism actually has a good name in Texas, and smart growth doesn't. Because smart growth, which is actually is after exactly the same thing, is rather government initiated and rather top down. Thou shalt do this or thou shalt be fined. The new urbanism, because of the circumstances of its birth, has always been, in fact, market oriented. The first generation of new urbanists did it because it sold real estate. Robert Davis, believe it or not, and I, believe it or not, are not saints. Okay? Walkability and mixed use actually sells real estate. That's why it took off. Then there was a second generation when the NIMBYs arose and developers couldn't get a permit because people eventually were so angry at the downward trade that every project represented. In the end, people said, I would rather have an open potato field, a fallow potato field, than a strip shopping center. And so they fought everything. And developers couldn't get permits. They couldn't get it. And the new urbanism came in and said, oh, yeah, but we're not that. We're this. We're part of the solution. And we still have a fantastic run of getting permits where others fail. Where there is NIMBYism. The third generation of new urbanism was driven by health. And the health element is extraordinary because, of course, Americans, maybe not Texas so much, really care about their health. I don't think you're so obsessed. The Californians want to be immortal. So they, of course, care about their health. But there was incredibly good studies done. Real, expensive, thorough science about how when you drove around everywhere and you were isolated at all times, it affected your physical health and your psychological health. Happy children, isolated older people, all latchkey kids, all these things have to do with urbanism. And a series of 2, 3, 4 professors spent 10 years studying it, and it was all about traditional urbanism outperforming everything decisively. It wasn't even close. The metrics aren't. And I thought, wow, we've won. I always kind of regretted it because I like fighting. Said, all we have to do is pull out the health stats, we won. And then we were overtaken by climate change. That has almost been forgotten. It's still there, but it's almost been forgotten. In fact, it's so forgotten that the next Congress for the New Urbanism is about this issue, to remind people that it's also good for your health, because it's all been taken over by lead and D. And it's all about, this is the way to save. This is the great tool about the atmospheric pollution, you know, the climate change. Or what is it called? Global warming? No, it's climate change. Climate change is what's going to ultimately kill us, and we have to do something about it. You know what causes climate change? You know what causes it? Very simple. The lifestyle of the American middle class. That is the beginning and the end of it. The lifestyle of the American middle class. How we consume land, how we live large, in very large McMansions, and internalize everything that the public realm doesn't give us, right? Why do we need double height living rooms? Because there's no town square. Why do we need media rooms? Because it's humiliating to go to the multiplex theater. Why do we need 3 places to dine indoors? You know, the breakfast room and the dining room and the things. Because who wants to deal with traffic to get to the place? Why do we need gyms indoors? Because it's a horrible experience to go to the gym. Why is that? By the way, I'm actually describing a North Dallas special. Okay, this is not. Don't imagine this is somewhere else. I am describing a house I saw in North Dallas. It was a few years ago. That was called the North Dallas Special. And as I speak to you, I see it. There's a master bedroom resort. Okay? So what does that do? Why do the developers have to build these huge, extraordinary McMansions? Because you have to internalize everything that the neighborhood doesn't give you anymore. You have to internalize everything. And it's, by the way, the price of a McMansion in Dallas is the biggest bargain on earth. It's wonderful what you get. The American private realm is the best in the world. It's only the public realm, when you get outside, that is the worst in the world. So you get this fantastic contrast of people who say, but I love Dallas. I love the suburbs. When they say that, they're referring to the private realm. Because at the same time, when you say, oh, if you love it, why don't you accept more of it? Here I am to build more sprawl. Why don't you like it? Because for them, all you're building is public realm. They hate the public realm. And they already have their private realm. So why should they put up with your public realm? That's really the secret of this psychosis, of this weird psychiatric disjunction, where they say, I love where I live, but I don't want more of it. It's because the private realm is great, and the public realm is horrible. Okay? And by the way, the developers have a horrible time of it. Who wants to build 2,700 square foot houses with 16 gables? You know, this surrogate village. Why does a house have to be like a village? Why does it have to look like a village? Because you haven't got a village. So the poor house has to be wiggle and shake. By the way, McMansions aren't that large. There are houses people love, that are larger than the McMansions. The problem with the McMansion is not its size, it's so visually aggressive. Because it has so many gables and so many windows, because it is actually being a surrogate for the absent village. It serves no one well. The developers hate building the damn things. You don't need to heat. Anyway, I'm talking as to, I got off track. I'm trying to describe why the middle class causes, okay? And the reason the middle class causes climate change is because we live large, we need big lots because we've not devised how to make private. We have no tools to make a small lot private. Even though south of the border in San Miguel, there are courtyard houses that do it beautifully. Right? We don't have that tool. It's dumbed down completely, so we need big land. We need to drive, so we need big parking lots. We consume a lot of land for elemental things. Then we drive about for everything, including cups of coffee. I'm in the suburbs all the time, unfortunately, doing work, you know, like an emergency room doctor, fixing completely dysfunctional places. And not only to get coffee or decent coffee in the morning to find Starbucks, do I need to get in a car, but I need to get in an arterial, because there's no connection with a small grid. So of course there's traffic congestion. North Dallas is 2 stories and has the traffic congestion of a metropolis, because everything, of course, hits the extremely long trips for ordinary things, taking very long. And then, of course, there is the fact that the isolation and the dissatisfaction of this life causes us to become consumers. The public realm is entirely commercialized. We cannot be in public without buying stuff. Think about it. Who's going to be in public unless there's food or shops, right? And if there is sport, by some miracle, it's full of food and shops. Okay? Americans cannot be in public. Now, all that consumption also causes global warming. So it's the lifestyle of the American middle class. Everything about the American middle class is what's causing global warming. And then we export it to the Chinese and the Indians and the Eastern Europeans and the Latin Americans. So if you are one of the few Texans that actually believes in climate change, you should know that it is about urbanism. It is about urbanism. That is really what needs to be addressed. So this new urbanism business, or the smart growth business, which seems to be a sideshow, is actually the central show. And of course you have problems with affordable housing and this and that, but the central problem is also urbanism. The bankruptcy is urbanism. Now, what do we have here? We have overlaid crises, okay? We have several crises that have really shaken our confidence. One crisis is the consciousness of climate change. By the way, climate change was perfectly identified in 1988, but Al Gore has made it front and center. Now we're frightened. That could have happened 10 years ago. It could also have happened 10 years from now, but it happened now. The financial meltdown, obviously that could have happened 10 years ago, and it could have happened 10 years from now, but it happened now. Peak oil, that could have happened 50 years ago or 50 years from now, but it happened now. What we confront now is a series of overlaid crises that everywhere but Houston has actually buffeted the confidence of people. And what I find is wherever I go, there's an incredible open-mindedness at every level, even government. California passed a law called Senate Bill SB 175 that basically says that all of the bureaucracies that have to do with planning have to talk to each other. So the silos have to coordinate. Where you build the roads has to be where the zoning goes, has to be where the transit goes, has to be where the schools go. So this random stuff that's going on about, DOTs, Texas Department of Transportation building ring roads like this, and the planners putting it over here, and the school board doing whatever they want, all that kind of stuff, they're trying very hard in California to break down those silos. That seems very little, but it's really very big. Everywhere I go, developers, private sector developers, they want ideas. They don't want experience. When they come to DPZ, which is our firm, in retrospect now, what we sold was experience. Oh, we've done that, and we've done more than anyone else, and there's nothing I haven't seen. Okay? And that goes for all the suburban planning firms. Guess what? Experience counts for nothing. For nothing. What that we've done actually has worked. It's all collapsed. The malls, the shopping centers, the housing subdivisions. And besides, if it is good, like the new urbanism, guess what? There's too much of it. Even new urbanism is waiting at the sidelines. So, in a very interesting way, what used to be our firm, which was about ideas at one point, was overtaken by experience. And if you look at our website, it's this dreadful thing full of experience. And the ideas, I think, are the eighth click, kind of hidden, because it tended to lose us work. These people have ideas, and so it was dangerous. What's happened is experience has eventually disappeared. What has come up above sea level is ideas. And I can tell you stories of developers who, in fact, would have fired us at the thought of some things that I would mention, literally, like 2 years ago. You speak that way and you lose their confidence, and you have to build back your confidence. That's the only thing they want to hear. And among the things they want to hear is agricultural urbanism, which, would have been grounds for, essentially, for not being hired just a few years ago. So I want to show you one aspect that's been developing in depth. Okay, what I've been doing now is, I just gave you kind of horizon tour, and now let's see one thing in depth. Okay, what happens when we care about farmland, which, by the way, is front and central in what David and his outfit has been doing. And I know I had a meeting earlier today in which everybody was absolutely experts. I mean, it was beautifully selected bunch of people I spoke to earlier. Now let's talk about agriculture. Of course, the thing to do is to preserve it as it is, to keep, within keep the wonderful soils you have in proximity of Houston and keep growing what you are. Lots of silos are undermining this. In Florida, we were asked to do a study about 5 years ago, actually it was about 7 years ago, called the Agricultural Retention Study, on land almost as good as yours, not quite, but climate possibly better. 12-month growing cycle. And we did, with the Agricultural Department of the University of Florida, we did the metrics, and we proved that actually agriculture was the highest and best use over development, and that and that farmers couldn't make the case that they needed to develop to make a living. And then in the middle of it, in the fourth year of the study, the Central American Free Trade Agreement completely destroyed it. Right? And no matter what you did, it was cheaper in Central America, where people get paid 95 cents an hour. Okay? So the whole thing collapsed. We shut it down, pretended it never happened. But these are some of the issues that we found. This is typical zoning in most places in the South. I think Texas has it, even Oregon has this. What happens in 1970, we discovered that Jimmy Carter, who was a farmer, tried to help the farmers by twisting the arms of the bankers to give the farmers loans. And the idea was, by the way, I want to tell you the platform in Abu Dhabi doesn't wiggle like this. And there's no formica that gives me splinters. Okay, I'm talking about a whole different. What Jimmy Carter did, you need to understand this, and the difficulty of putting urban boundaries, is everybody who doesn't know reality says, why don't you just throw up an urban boundary? Well, unfortunately, outside of the urban boundary, we have 5 and 2 acre zoning as of right. As of right. And what happened was, just so it's imprinted in your mind, is to get the loans, the bankers did not understand the business of farming. And in fact, he said, show me your business plan. So the farmer would come up and say, well, this year I made $200,000, and the next year I made 20, and the next year I lost 50, and the next year I made 280. And the banker said, what the hell kind of business is this? I don't understand it. I can't use your business as collateral. So just to help me out, cover my ass kind of thing, why don't you get zoning on your land? So because I understand zoning, and I can, write that up in the little form and put it in the drawer, and I've got collateral. Now, in 1970, nobody dreamt that in counties like your peripheral counties would ever be urbanized. Growth would never get there. This is 1970, remember? Okay? All that stuff was just a fiction. Well, growth did get there, and wherever we go in the South, possibly Texas, but all over the United States where farmers were active, there is 5 and 2 acre zoning. Okay? So all this beautiful landscape, as of right, can actually be built this way, which is pretty dysfunctional. This is a typical outfit all over the South. So what do we do with this? Well, this is not this is expensive to do, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't work for anything very much. And what we did is we said, guess what? With some organized zoning, you can cluster. After all, we discovered, this farmer here, all he wants to do is retire. He is not Jerry Hines. He doesn't have to make 20% internal rate of return every year. The guy just wants to retire and needs $250,000, that's it, to get out of debt, or to transfer it to his son without debt, or to pay the death tax, or whatever it is. Okay, so he needs 250, he needs 350, and that can be handled with 6 lots. So we did the math, and by clustering it, you can essentially create rural villages and actually preserve pretty decent landscaping. We did this, okay? And that is still alive. Okay, that is still a possibility. You need to code it. This is something that needs to not only be possible, but it needs to be in the repertoire. What doesn't work is saying growth won't happen. That's what doesn't work, because it's already zoned. And by the way, even if it isn't zoned, some pretty respectable farmer friend of yours shows up at the public hearing and says, look, all I want is to retire, he's going to get the zone. Okay, it's just human factor. So let's face the fact that there has to be some growth there, and that you have 2 million people coming, and a lot of them are going to be out there. This is one of the best things that you can do, is cluster them. What helps clustering, and that's a cluster, for example, it's just a little rule that says, okay, Mr. Farmer, you can build 4 houses, but instead of building it in the middle of the lot, build it in an intersection. The landscape is much more open. these are 4 farmhouses, or actually bankers' farmhouses in this case. Bankers, weekends, farmhouses. But in any case, this intersection is quite nice, and the farming remains, quite large and more functional. Just that little element, with 5 or 10 acre zoning is helpful. The other thing is to create these centers where certain things that really help farming come along. Like, for example, we all know, if you read Michael Pollan, that we need manure. You need to replenish the soil organically. Somebody has to have the cows. Not everybody can have the cows. You can have barns with cows. You can also have chickens. You can also have a place for the farmer's market integrated. You can also recycle the sewage to a certain level that the municipality will not do, that you can use it again for fertilizer. The idea that the whole human sewage can't be used because it's not properly conceived to go back to the ground can be handled here. And you can also have a place like this one, which is a combination cooking school. You can clear, if you know how to cook and you convince people to listen to you, you can clear $1,200 a morning. Okay? Just teaching 12 people for $100 how to cook whatever you know how to cook. My grandmother's pie, or some kind of German stew. That'll work. You give them a place to do that. But the most important thing is that agriculture has a certain value, say X. When you process it, for example, take a strawberry, make it into jam, or take something and make it to a pie, pumpkin, the multiplier is 10x. There's a tremendous multiplier that happens when you cook it and can it and bottle it. Believe it or not, our federal government doesn't allow you to do that at home. You cannot cook it at home and sell it publicly because you don't have an inspected kitchen. Okay? And just in case you're cleaning your dog in the kitchen sink, we don't want you to have any hairs in the jam, or whatever they're imagining. Okay, that happens. So since private kitchens aren't certified, you have to provide kitchens. And also there's always an excess that makes very nice. Whatever is excessive that month, or excuse me, that week, you can actually have it as a restaurant. Fresh food, come here. Now it happens that every single dish this month has squash in it. Squash soup, squash salad, squash, desserts, whatever. It's got that nature, but people like it. It's part of the season. The squash is in, this is what we eat. This disadvantage of having food coming in cohorts like that, we just have the crop, can actually very easily be turned into a virtue. These, we discovered, are essential. One of these every 10 square miles. Oh, by the way, don't forget that a lot of equipment you don't need that you use 10 times, like tractors, can be rented. You need to have a rental place, that allows you not to have to buy the tractor or the little, or whatever. All that equipment can also be rented in an organized way. And of course, as always, there's management advice. Now is the time to plant the turnips. And by the way, Joe, Jerry over there, and Edna, that planted turnips. I think you will be overplanting turnips. If you plant turnips, why don't you do beets this year? So there's a little bit of kind of common wisdom that would occur over the cafe, over the coffee at the village, the village diner. And that gets actually institutionalized here. And this was the great discovery, that these elements here, this infrastructure, actually allows food to actually work much better as a business. So that's where we took it. We took it that far. By the way, this is very smart growth government interventions. This is government at its best doing this. But let's talk about private sector, because that is actually much more interesting and much more widespread. The tool that the new urbanists have put forth against zoning is called a transect. Now, bear this in mind, because this is actually above all in Houston, you should know this. Houston is the great experiment because it doesn't have zoning, right? It looks exactly like every other place. Exactly. What is the source of that phenomenon? The source of the phenomenon is that you self-segregate. What essentially happens everywhere is that all the rich people get all the good real estate, upland with the oaks, and all the poor people get the malarial swamps, as usual. Okay? And all the malls, all the shopping malls are at the intersections. and all the high-rises are wherever, Jerry Hines went, and it all goes there because they reinforce each other. And the convention center forms another cluster. This place is as segregated as if you kept zoning. This old idea that without zoning you get diversity, rich diversity, was obliterated by the car. That rich diversity happened only when most people didn't have cars, and so within a pedestrian shed, they needed to have the diversity. They needed to have the shops, they needed to have the transit, they needed to have the richer and the poorer people. Once everybody got a car, the car permits you to drive past the local store to the one that's cheaper or better, permits you to drive past or quite far from your job to the house that's cheaper or you like better. The car has liberated completely the discipline, the geographic discipline, which is intrinsic of urbanism and caused its intrinsic diversity. So it doesn't matter whether you don't have zoning, you don't have diversity. What the new urbanist codes do is they actually administer diversity. They cause diversity to happen, but in what is a symbiotic way, just like nature. There is a concept called the transect that's been around for 209 years, and it's basically, actually the first concept was the habitat. Do you know that in the 19th century, it wasn't clear what the habitat was? People thought that you could grab a species and just move it over. They didn't know that the species was actually happier there in the microclimate with the minerals of the soil and with the degree of humidity. They didn't know that minerals, flora, and fauna were actually symbiotic. This was a concept of the late 19th century. And by the way, that's why they did things like bring kudzu over here. And by the way, if you had a species that was in the way, but you kind of liked, like there's a tortoise you liked, you know what you did? You pulled it out and shoved it over. There was none of this environmental stuff that you had to keep it in its habitat. When the habitat, this was an incredible conceptual understanding. When the habitat was conceptualized, they soon realized that they overlapped. That actually the turtle could go a little further, and that the bird could go over here. And they came up very quickly with the concept of the transect, which is a sequence of habitats. Like here, this is a drawing from Ian McCart, and you know that this habitat here under the water has almost nothing growing in it except fish, right? Over here where it's tidal, you get seaweed, you get crabs. And then you get the first dune line where you get the beginning of plants that actually have roots. And then in the second dune line, you get conifers, for example. And then you go up and there's the foothills, and then eventually the Rockies, and then on top. And everybody knows that lichen grows here and seaweed grows there, and you don't mix it, right? That is what the transect works. And that's how nature is understood by environmentalists. All transects, including Ian McCart, who took it the furthest, he was in the 60s, he was a professor at Penn, died about 5 years ago. He made wonderful analysis of the transects, but they never made a proposition as to what happens. They were always in nature. They always stopped short of where humans build. And so what you get are places like the woodlands. By the way, he did the woodlands. You get the woodlands, you get all these places like Hilton Head Island, you get the environmental analysis, but what humans actually build is sprawl. Because within the preserved environmental sensitivity of the woodlands and Hilton Head and so forth, since no proposition is made, what is in fact there are strip shopping centers, monocultural housing subdivisions, and office parks. Ian McCart never made the proposition of what it was to be when you built. He stopped at the edge of nature, the urban boundary. What the new urbanists did is we took it and we said, yes, there's wilderness, the natural zone. Then there are rural zones with its rules. This is where Ian McCart stopped. And then there are rules for suburbia. There are rules for general urban zones, you know, that messy American urbanism. Then there's the urban center zone, which is the commercial downtowns, and then the urban cores. Okay, so what we did is we took the same concept and we said, you begin folding humans in. Now, why does that help? Because in the public process these days, all planning is done publicly, people have environmental ideas. I'm going to give you the example of just one. I never do a public process that somebody doesn't stand up and say, we must have dark sky. Right? We've got to have dark sky. Now, I don't have the bad taste to ask why. the birds being disoriented. It's just an article of faith. You know, that you have dark sky, although you can make the argument stars are nice to look at. Now, if you ever are lucky enough to have a young person show up at a charrette, they never do. What they often say, I say, so what's up with this town? And what they say is, oh, I'm skipping out as soon as I can. I'm going to Austin. There ain't nothing happening here. Okay. Now what he's saying is there's no nightlife. I can't stay up late after work. I can't get a date. And by the way, I can't breed and reproduce. So, you know, there's a fundamental ecological problem here. So I have to go where there's more genetic material available at night. Okay. Now, if you don't think that's important, it really is, because you can kill a town because the young people leave. Okay, so I'm sitting here having a next level of understanding, and I can't just say, oh, madam, you know, of course you're going to have your dark sky, and say, well, bye to the youth. You have to say, no. And so what you say, well, what you're saying is you want a nightlife. Well, nightlife, by the way, has to do with lights that are bright at night. Okay, this is not, have you ever seen what dark sky downtown looks like? It looks like any socialist country. And you feel like not going out. Okay, because it looks lugubrious. Okay, you need light at night. So who's right? Let me tell you something. In America, no one is wrong. Okay, any planner that deigns to say you're wrong is off the table. And the reason is that we have the finest marketing slogan of all time, which is if you come to America, you get life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Check that out, Madison Avenue. And the pursuit of happiness is self-defined. So that kid's pursuit of happiness is getting a date. That lady who already has bread said that my pursuit of happiness is contemplating the sky. You're both right. You're completely right. Okay? And so what the planner does, who has any sense of fairness, maturity, and may I say Americanism, is you say, I will allocate each of them so that they actually reinforce the environment. So therefore, in suburbia, we will write a dark sky ordinance, and downtown, we will let the right lights rip. And that, by the way, that goes for the noise ordinance, that goes for swales. Now there's another disease going on, which is now the water all has to filter through exactly where it lands. Okay, that's the new obsession. You know, swales and cattails downtown. Well, please observe what it costs to do that. First of all, the shops don't work when there's a little swamp between you and the storefront. Okay. Second of all, you can't, you know, if you have a hard time just cleaning up the little bits of paper, try doing it in a cattail situation. Okay, which somebody has to actually go in with a glove. Some of that park you built here, you know, that has very native species, you know, the new wonderful park, you know, of course, you know, bows to natural native landscape. If anybody throws anything there, I can guarantee it, that in fact it's a problem to fix it. Now it's only a very circumscribed park. You can manage it, but you can't do an urbanism that does that. Are they wrong? Are you wrong about that? No, of course not. You're not wrong. You do that kind of handling of the stormwater here, but when you get downtown, you actually have the old system of putting it in a pipe and processing it elsewhere. Times Square has 4 trees. Okay? It's 4 trees. You say, well, that isn't environmental. Yes, it is environmental, because it has 8 million tourists a month that are not in Yellowstone bothering the bears. Okay? Okay, you see the zen of it? And that's the truth. And you start putting a swamp there, you're not going to get 8 million, you're going to get the 4 million already believers and that kind of thing. And the fact is that we should not exterminate anything. There's nothing cultural that should be exterminated. We should be able to have a paved plaza. Of course we should be able to have a swale. What we need to do in your standards is to allocate them. This is not happening in America. In America, everybody's writing one standard. The urban foresters graduating probably from the University of Texas have looked at an oak and said, aha, an oak needs 120 square feet of permeable surface to be happy. Right? Technically, yes. But you know what 120 square feet is? It's 10 by 12. Try to do an urbanism in which each planter is 10 by 12. It's over. You can't do it. You suburbanize America. And that is the greatest thing that we have against us. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that anybody who writes one standard desiccates and eliminates the richness of urbanism. Whenever we go to a place and we try to set up a system, as we're doing now in Abu Dhabi, where they're doing it from beginning to end, we speak to every specialist, dark sky people, urban forester people, developer people with your density rules, parking people, mixed use people, and we say, what is setback people, pitch roof and flat roof people, you know, brick people, wood people, everybody, architects, you say, don't write one standard. I want 6 settings. What is the most rural that you have? What is the most urban? And then give me 6 in between. Or if not, if you can't do 6, at least 3. And then with that, all these specialists speaking to each other, they coordinate with each other because of this transit zoning system. Each of these is a zone, and so everybody gets 6 standards. And because they're symbiotic, they reinforce. The urbanism is more urban in every way. Give you an example, just to get to growing food. What's your rule on chickens? Okay, you know what the rules are all over America? No chickens at all, or 500,000 chickens if you want. There's nothing between no chickens and the chicken farm. Well, has anybody thought about 4 chickens, which is enough eggs for a family? Or what about the pet chicken? Or what about the 5 chickens and the rooster? You see? All of these are declensions. Like, at what level can you go to the 4 chickens? Not the apartment house, we understand that. But you can do it in a quarter-acre lot. And is it, once you have an acre lot, can you have a rooster? You know, big theological discussion. You know? I know. At what point is a goat fine? At what point is the cow? You've all done it with horses, you know, in Texas. But all of these things need to be discussed and everything allocated, because if not, you basically destroy urbanism. Urbanism loves complexity, but people also want predictability. The people who live here want certain things, and the people who are there want certain things. One of the funniest things I've ever heard is this fellow in a Manhattan apartment who was living ecologically for a year. He's composting. He has a composting toilet. And I can tell you at the end, he's going to write a book at the end. This is to write a book. And already the New York Times has reported, and they have reported a certain smell. And of course, you know, the end result is getting divorced. You know, that is the end result. His wife is already sneaking around buying things. You know, the reporter caught that. So it's just stupid. But on the other hand, interestingly, now, there's at least 1 or 2 professors. And I want to show this. Now, this is the intellectual part of the new urbanism. Before I drag you through the mud of marketing, okay, I'd like to elevate you to the mode of theory. Let's look at the transect. Okay, here you see rural to urban. Okay, now let's look at environmentalists. American environmentalists are unique in the world because they were born in the fight for the national parks. Okay, all the, you know, the history, the great heroes, and the first legislation for national parks. Because of that peculiarity, American environmentalism is based, has as its ideal wilderness. Wilderness is the ideal. Now, when wilderness is your ideal, and the first human walks in, that ideal is decreased. Is the greatest, second human is worse, third human. European environmentalism did not have wilderness when it floated in. People could see very clearly that you could build on a hillside with great honor. People could see there was very little wilderness left in Europe. So European environmental law and concepts always integrate humans to some extent. It's much more integrated. The Americans always keep it out. And most American environmentalists do not factor the urban. And that is why, in my opinion, they're always on the defensive. Okay? You can pass more and more. Have you noticed? You pass more and more and more and more legislation. You're ever more powerful. Developers come to see you. You know, 25-year-old fish and wildlife people with developers on their knees in front of them, right? And still, developers are on the defensive. The reason is that they only have half the tools. American environmentalists only have the tools of nature. They don't have the tools of culture. They don't know that the real secret is not an urban boundary, which in case won't hold. Not even Portland's is held. The real secret is to make towns, urbanism, so great that people don't want to leave. Okay, the people in Manhattan are not there because they're being punished. They're not leaving at 240 units to the acre because they're being punished. Okay, you know, and you know what it's like if Manhattan, which by the way is a very lousy performer in terms of water, you know, it's a heat. God, its ecological footprint. Can you imagine that there are books that say the ecological footprints of Manhattan and London are a problem, when in fact it's a solution? Those 2.5 million people would occupy 8, 10 times the amount if they went to the suburbs. So you see, there's actually almost a quasi-theological, theoretical problem in environmentalism, because they only have half the tools, they measure wrong. Manhattan is not a problem. Manhattan is a solution. But if all you have is green, it's as if all you have was a nail, a hammer, you treat everything like a nail. So they look and they say everything must be greened, when in fact, that will get you to a certain extent, but also everything must be urbanized. Now let's talk about, I'm going to talk about the theory here. Let's talk about marketing. Why would anybody, when you go to Houston in the suburbs, there's a very peculiar look. You're used to it, so you don't know how strange it is. But the look is single-story and two-story houses, horizontal, and then everyone's on high-rise, right? I say, what's up with that? They said they're horizontal or vertical. Well, that's because the amenity in a place like Houston is the yard or the view. You sell yards or views, yards and views. Now, the middle scale, which is the garden apartment, is for losers. Is for people who are actually in the waiting until they can afford a yard or a view. Right? All the garden apartments are for losers. Now, what's wrong with the garden apartment when in fact an apartment in New York is an asset? When you don't have a backyard as your amenity, you need when you don't have a backyard out your back door, you need a street light out the front door. The only solution to that middle scale is real urbanism. So if you're going to build the middle scale, the 5 to 8 stories, you need to have a great street light. And no developer should just do the density or make it look like it's dense or make it look urban without actually delivering the street light. Because the amenity is the street light. You will fail. And that's why so many fake new urbanist communities fail. Because you're giving, at 5 stories, you get neither the view, you get neither the yard. You have to give them the street light. You have to give them the street light. Or, I have advised more developers to not do new urbanist developments. I say, look, I'm sorry, just do suburbia. It'll actually work better. The hybrids don't work. They really have to have the street light. You're building too many apartments here downtown that in fact have a lousy street frontage. And they will always be less desirable, you know, than in fact either the house or the yard. So get that right, because we have one generation of failure in that regard already. Okay, so that's about that. Now let's talk about theory. There needs to be some kind of theory that allows for the loss of open space. Because what's happened is, look, everything we do is a transaction. I am transacting with oxygen, right? I'm consuming oxygen, making CO2, but hopefully it's worthwhile speech, right? This is a worthwhile. I'm not carbon loading the atmosphere. I'm justifying my consuming of oxygen, okay? The same thing happens when you buy a scotch for $13. It better be good scotch or you won't buy it again. Continually happens. The reason that NIMBYism arose is that the loss of open space at some point stopped being worthwhile. Now, all over for 300 years in America, we lost open space, but we gained the village. We gained Charleston, we gained Austin, you know, we gained Santa Barbara, right? No one would demolish Santa Barbara or Austin or Charleston to regain the wetlands that were lost, right? That was an upward trade. What happens with suburban sprawl, the suburban typologies of office parks, shopping centers, is eventually society has figured out that it's a downward trade. That the loss of that open space was not worth the shopping center. The shopping center is not only hideous, but it causes traffic congestion. So therefore, people who normally don't even get up to vote will go to hearing after hearing after hearing to prevent a strip shopping center, and all that's being replaced is a dysfunctional potato field. They would rather have the potato field because they're sick of the downward trade. That's all that's happening. Our culture has caught on that development in America is very likely to be a downward trade. And this is what happens, okay? So we need to establish a theory by which you can actually make the trade almost scientific. Like, is it worth losing this for what? Now, how do environmentalists speak, which is to say, the natural and speaks of the cultural sense? It turns out that there's one element that is shared by two, highly valued. It's diversity. The sociologists are obsessed by diversity. The urbanists love diversity, and the environmentalists love diversity too. They hate monocultures of any kind. They hate monocultures. So we say, wow, diversity is the common language. That is the currency. Let us talk about diversity. Now, the environmental system that values only wilderness, right, values the highest point of natural diversity is, of course, wilderness, right? And the lowest point of natural diversity is Times Square. Problem with this is that suburbia, which is in the middle, rates higher than Times Square. And so you get environmentalists all the time looking at projects that have more green, 45% green, 35% green, more trees, more swales, and actually they value it more than really solid, hard-paved urbanism where people actually walk. That is a huge problem, because they're only measuring one thing. Okay. Now, what about the new urbanists? Are we great? No. We have a problem too. We so value natural diversity, right, that in fact it goes the other way. When all you measure is cultural diversity, you do like that, what happens is, theoretically, the suburbs rate higher than wilderness. So we're wrong too. So what we need to do is get everyone, the urbanists and the environmentalists, to measure diversity. So the sum total of natural and urban diversity needs to be equal. Then you get the correct diagram, right? Wilderness is the highest performer in terms of natural diversity. The urban core is the highest performer in terms of social diversity. And the lowest performer, of course, is suburbia, that has the lowest incidence of social and natural diversity. The whole theory has been corrected, right? There it is. Actually exposed, false theory, correct theory. But there's one problem. This isn't marketable. You can't go around saying, oh guys, by the way, you see the theoretical proposition, single family house is off the table. That isn't going to work. So what we need to do, what the new codes do, the new smart codes do, is they push up the performance of the single family house. What they basically say is they don't even operate, those solar panels on the roof won't even operate the elevator lights. It's total bullshit. So leave them alone, okay, leave them alone, because already, by living in an urban way, they're doing their job. And of course, wilderness is doing its job by being completely functioning ecologically. The problem is getting the single family house to perform better. So the codes that are written say, you're welcome to have a big yard in a single family house, but that big roof you have, you can actually meaningfully harvest sun. That big yard, if you're in the right place on the hilltop, you can actually meaningfully harvest wind. And by the way, recycling, don't expect that truck to do it. If you're gonna have a big yard, you compost, you recycle. And by the way, all this driving around you do because you want a big yard, that's cool, but grow food. Okay? In other words, we don't ban it, we compensate it differentially. You don't write categorical rules that say everybody has to be equally green. No, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. You achieve green by several means. At the center here, this green can, so what the new codes do is they load up the single family house to mitigate their lousy performance by having a superior green technological performance. And these are the ones that in fact the codes focus on. They're the ones, by the way, that have the yard to do it, and the freedom to rotate, and the cross-ventilation. You can't cross-ventilate an apartment building or an office building. You can't cross-ventilate a house. So don't write a rule that says every room shall be cross-ventilated, because that's going to crash the first time you try it. But you can say in T3, you can have every room cross-ventilated, etc. Okay, so that's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you, based on this premise, how we code, in a smart code, the houses to actually, the houses in every other building to grow food. Now, how does the transect work? The transect is a taxonomic engine. It's one of the greatest ordering devices known to man. It can take anything and established a sequence of more urban and more rural. If we were to take the shoes of the first two rows and put them here, within 5 minutes we could put them in order of rural to urban. Right? You know, yours is rougher leather, yours has thicker soles, you have more heel, it's shinier. No problem. It's a taxonomic engine. I don't want to do it, but they're rural and urban haircuts too, which is rather cruel. A lot of food is rural and urban. But let me just give you an example. One of the well-known things about Texas vulgarity is the Cadillac in the ranch. Okay, the Cadillac in the ranch. Now, you may not be sensitive to this, but people elsewhere say, well, the Texans, they have, you know, it's the image of the Cadillac in the ranch. The problem is, it's actually a transsex violation. Okay, a Cadillac looks perfectly well in T6, it doesn't look so good in T2. By the way, something that we should know, and we already know, SUVs and Hummers look really stupid downtown, and more people say, get the Hummer out of here. But you shouldn't ban Hummers, okay? Because they actually make sense out there if you actually live in the wilderness. It's a lot of the kitsch that is going on in this country is just something simply in the wrong place of the transect. By the way, architects who do buildings that are very well liked in some instances, Mies van der Rohe, the glass office building, marvelous downtown. The same people that love downtown Chicago hate the little bank in their main street made out of steel and glass. I know it for a fact. They hate the little bank, and then you go to downtown Chicago, they love it. Okay, they like highways. They used to like the old highways. They love the old highways that were made out of stone. You know, the pre-war highways in which the bridges were made out of cut stone. They don't like them made out of concrete. On the other hand, concrete downtown seems to fit very well. A lot of the problems that we have with modern architecture is not that there's anything wrong with modern architecture. It's just that it has not developed a transect vocabulary of urban to rural the way traditional architecture has. And the minute it does, it's well liked. Now, one of the problems we always think that, oh, they're putting urban buildings downtown. Like, why are we putting a steel box, you know, in the middle of the ranch? There's also kitsch. You know, the City Hall in Austin, you know what I'm talking about? By, what's his name? Predock, is completely kitsch. Okay? It's made out of rough stone. It's got waterfalls. You know, if you have a good suit and you touch that, it tears your suit. Like, what kind of urban building is that? It's obviously a rural building, and I think it's the most abysmal taste to put a rural building downtown. It's actually to say, it's almost like saying, this city isn't worthy to have a proper suit. It will always wear short pants. Or, you know, there's such rubes that they'll only understand rural building. And I think that architecture has to get its act together. And one of the ways, I'm very much an advocate of modern architecture, but they need to actually respond contextually. And contextual isn't just looking like the next building, it's an internal vocabulary of urban and rural. And it can be done with materials and shapes and so forth. Actually, quite a few architects here and in Austin are picking up on it. Texas is probably the best in terms of architects having both an urban and a rural vocabulary, but they all need to do that. This fence is in Williamsburg. Brilliant, Williamsburg. Williamsburg is brilliant. By the way, it's nothing to do with historic Williamsburg. It was an attempt by the architects of the 20s to bring good taste to a very kitsch America. And so they built this ideal town in every regard. And it still works that way. It had a wonderful effect. Within 2 blocks or 3 blocks of Williamsburg, you have this fence, which is obviously highly rural, right? It's for cattle. It's got spikes on it. And then this fence is also rural. Remember, it's just, you know, it's split rail. It doesn't have nails. It works on gravity. It's as crude a fence as you can build. As you move inward towards the street, you get the split rail fence that has actually been inset, standing vertically. This is more urban. And here, the wood has gone to the mill. You see? And now it's flat. It's been milled. And here, the wood has been painted. It's even more urban. And over here, this is pretty high class. The lumber has actually been to the lathe. You know, quite a lot more. And then finally, you get the brick, and then the cast, and then the iron. Iron in the country is kitsch. Okay, split rail in the city is kitsch. You see it all the time. Okay, part of the reason the mansions are hilarious, or some of these ranches outside in Texas, and Ralph Lauren's ranch is not vulgar is that Ralph Lauren gets the fence right and the Texan rancher doesn't. You know, and it's just a transect violation. And if the culture had not been completely dismantled, we'd get this right. Okay. I just give you this as an example of extreme depth and a very little thing to see how this way of looking at the world and writing standards for the world can actually put a lot of things into order. Now, here, this is a transect. This is part of the smart code. By the way, the smart code is freeware. It's a code that is just essentially a piece that you can plug into modules of everything. These are the modules. Okay, these are the things that are considered from higher to lower density, to degree of mixed use, to whether you have how many hens you have. Everything that comes up for examination has one right answer, which is all of it. Okay, you're right and you're right, let's just allocate so that it happens. And this is what the code does. Now, what about farming? Growing food. This is a transect, as you can see. It's a little out of date, but there's forageable land. Forageable land is where wilderness essentially provides the hunting, you're in California, you go to the sea and get abalone, right? Or you pick a crab, right? That's foraging, as is going and getting berries, or going and getting mushrooms, or shooting little animals or big animals. That's foraging. And of course, that takes place in wilderness. Don't upset the suburbanites with a lot of shooting. At least I don't think that works. Okay? But it happens here. And then there's farms, and this correctly, they should be tractor farms, not farms. Now, I spoke to a very sophisticated Californian who has spent his entire life saying farming must be separated, by great green belts. And what he's thinking about is a certain kind of farming that has to do with big machinery, getting up in the morning, clanking around, and spraying, sometimes with airplanes. That is not a good neighbor. That's called tractor farming. And that's different. There is, as you come in, something called a specialty farm. A specialty farm is a high-value produce, say an avocado, or a very special pear, that because you get so much for that item, for that pear, you can actually manage it by hand. You can go and grab it or spray it or pick off the insect that's eating it. Whatever it is, it can be done much closer and within agriculture. Certain orchards can do that, you see. You have to be very precise about that. So gradually, you zone specialty farms like this. And by the way, at this point, the chickens come into being. And at some point, there's a critical cutoff about the rooster. And then there are community gardens, and then front yard gardens, kitchen gardens. There's a lot of gardens that happen on the ground. And then at a certain level of density, the ground no longer gets sunlight, right? In townhouses, the ground doesn't work. So you go into roof gardens, and then you go into balcony gardens, and you go into container gardens. So eventually window boxes. So every single way of growing food actually has a perfect correlation to the density. Now the beauty, the reason this theory works, is that the more land you're wasting with a larger lot, the more you're expecting to produce. If you're doing a great job living in a high-rise already, you get a window box and you can get your rosemary from it. Because you don't have to mitigate. You see? And what's extraordinary about the transect, we always find, is how everything falls into place. There's one of these theories that says that actually very, very seldom fails. In fact, when it fails, it's not the theory that's wrong, it's just that what you're trying to do is wrong. Like I said, it's the Cadillac in the wrong place. So we sent this to England. Now, England is having a lot of top-down planning. And I think it's salutary to actually see what happens if you're not Texas. If you're California. What happens is the NIMBYism in England and in California has caused an incredible amount of housing deficiency. In the London arc to the west of London, there's a deficiency of almost 1 million units. And so, for example, you get a county like Hertfordshire County, just north of London, that is so deficient in housing that Whitehall has top-down says, by 2014, you have to build 87,000 units. Okay, it's like telling a small town like one of yours, 87,000 units. And by the way, you have 5 months to decide where they go, and if you don't decide, we'll decide. Okay? And we were asked to solve this, because the public process in America, we're supposed to reconcile things. And we did a very interesting job clarifying the issues, which I'm not going to talk about today. But one of the things that came down from London was that the minimum number of units to be built henceforth in England is 28 units to the acre, 14 to the hectare, almost 30. That's it. They decided 14. Now, I don't know one way or the other. Okay, I think, well, the English say that. Who am I to ask? But when I went out and I started looking at the villages and the towns of England, you find a people that really love their little gardens, like no one loves their little gardens. Cute little ladies with cute little gardens, you know, old, I mean, it's just, and eventually you say, how can they be doing this to their own people? This is unbelievably cruel. Like, you know, one generation of this and every yard will be owned by a banker and little old ladies won't have their little gardens anymore. So I took it upon myself to actually say, to come up with this theory or to present this theory, and I said, look, yes, 28 units to the acre, but if you mitigate, if you actually grow food, then you justify the yard, don't you? And they understood that. You know why? And they told me this. A village is a machine for growing food. The only reason a village exists is to grow food. If you want trade, make a town. If you want military, make a fortified town. If you want, et cetera, et cetera. You know, all of the typologies. And I never thought of villages as machines to grow food. Okay? So the village we're trying to put back, and by the way, you will notice success already. Google Eco Village. Okay? About 3 weeks ago, the first Eco Village was presented as a result of this. When we did our work, Eco Villages were not in the cards, they were impossible. Only Eco Towns at 28 units to the acre. Okay, only Eco Towns, and already the first Eco Village has been proposed. They moved very quickly, by the way, because of that deadline of 2014. So the Eco Village is what this is about. So we sent them this, and the Brits sent this back. This is absolutely amazing. It's just absolutely extraordinary. Okay.
We can't see it.
It's fantastic. They know exactly what they are. Okay? It just goes on like that. Fungi and brassicas and root crops and salads and top fruit and small fruit. They're so on top of it that we gave them the original Transect categories of gardening, and in 2 weeks it came back perfectly executed what they would grow. And by the way, the next step is they know when, and by the way, there's a huge amount of knowledge about when you plant and how much you gain, you know, when you plant, by what date, etc. They are on top of this technology. I believe a lot of people in this country are on top of this technology too. There are a lot of magazines, there are a lot of people who really know. And when we designed this village I'm about to show you, we are actually going to build on that know-how, on that vernacular know-how that has not yet died. Okay, so this is the first of the Eco Towns. It's called Southlands. It's in Vancouver, British Columbia, where the best planning in North America takes place. It's between, this is the urban edge, between the town of Tsawwassen and the Boundary Bay here, which is the original village. So you can see it's an infill project. And this, by the way, is the United States border, just to orient you, right here. So this farm of about 400 acres was the farm that was left over when this developer died, who had built the whole of Tsawwassen. And he gave it to his son, who basically infilled the existing town, and now it was time to actually to develop it. Of course, there was huge opposition. Everybody living in the house by the developer hated the developer. You know, that kind of stupid thing. So we developed, and now we were asked to do it, and it was very curious because I was very skeptical. I went kicking and screaming. I said, agriculture doesn't work. What are you talking about? I was the #1 cynical expert. I never intended to put dirt underneath my fingernails. I have visited the farmers of Europe. It's a terribly hard life. And I came in asking all the difficult questions because I really didn't think it would work. What they did is they had 2 consultants that convinced me. One was a fellow from the University of Tsawwassen, an American, who was actually had it all worked out, the soils, the grade of the soil, the economics of it. It's just a wonderful bit of science. And then a person called Michael Eruin, an American from Southern California, who had actually done it. And he had 20 acres in San Diego that grossed, check this, $12 million a year. Okay, 20 acres, $12 million. He was a wizard. And eventually sold it, probably to development, because development didn't worth more than that, and he moved to Vancouver. And he was a consultant, and he was absolutely terrific, and he guided us every step of the way. I can tell you just a few things to explain some of the reality of this, how it works. But the basic idea is that you have the tractor farming out here, large, and then, which is called the rural peri-urban, yes, the rural agriculture. And then you have agriculture at the edge. This crinkly edge is very interesting and productive, and it's called peri-urban. And at that point, human energy is expended and growing. Okay? A lot of humans that normally do ornamental landscape, actually, you activate them growing food. And one of the things we introduced was not only the crinkly edge, but actually we inserted it into the urbanism like this, where the farmer had the water anyway, where the canals were. So instead of removing the waterways, we did that. So we have a huge amount of periphery, peri-urban. Okay, peri-urban is where the tracts are large enough, but there are also a lot of humans to help. And then there is intra-urban, which is inside, and these people are living urbanistically, and these are the people with the roof gardens, and the balcony gardens and so forth. And they are more like participants as a hobby, but they're not productive. Here's the deal that we made, or that they made. It says, we occupy 1/3 of the farmland, and we triple food production. Okay. Who can object to that? Occupy, because people say, we must save our farmland. Why do you want to save your farmland? Because we need the food. Fine. You're also having 2 million Texans coming within the next 20, 30 years. What's the deal? Are you going to let them just obliterate the farming, or are you going to obliterate a piece of the farming, but in the end, functionally, operationally, you want them to grow more food? So it's 1/3 of the land. Exactly. This is 33% of the dot. And the economics are you triple food production. So how do you do that? American planned developments of this type have a huge budget for ornamental landscape. Huge budget. The Woodlands has a huge budget. There are hundreds of people maintaining it, doing all sorts of difficult work. Okay? And then if you don't have somebody doing your garden, you're not yourself doing your garden, you're paying somebody to do it. So there's a great deal of wealth, literally money, being expended in ornamental landscaping, and in addition to that, there is your own effort. Like, Liz and I actually do it that way. Fellow comes, Ramon comes, he really does the brute work, the heavy stuff, etc. This stuff that's not so fun, the stuff that needs to be done when maybe we're not there. He picks the papayas when we're not home and so forth. So we're not chained to it. I don't have to come back from my vacation because the papaya is going to fall. He does it, but we pay him. And we do this instead of ornamental landscaping. Okay, so I'm actually experimenting now, and I know very well that we can't do it alone. But there is a huge cushion in American suburban development that's ready to do that, and that's what enables it. This is not a real 100% farm, nor is it, by the way, a commune. I also looked into communes, which people are talking about again, and why they failed. And I knew some communes, and they were a pretty good deal, the communes. And here's the story that I found out. Why did they break up? Eventually, 3 women ended up doing the dishes. Okay, and when they quit, the whole thing fell apart. Okay, that's the story. I mean, that is the story. There is no other story. Okay, so what do? Well, in those days, you couldn't do anything but take it apart. But these days, you hire somebody to do the dishes to keep the commune going. So the whole premise is, we're not running a commune here. There's going to be paid labor to actually help out. That's fundamental. And by the way, if you find that obnoxious, go join a commune. This is actually an American-style planned unit development, with homeowners association. Now, how do we get everybody to behave, to actually grow the food, etc.? How do we do it? Well, there's something called the Homeowners Association document. Homeowners Association is private government. We invented them in this country because we don't like municipal government. So we secede from municipal governments, willingly pay additional taxes for a higher level of security, maintenance, and responsiveness. You pick up the phone and you say, sprinkler in the parkway is broken. Okay, now try that in an American city. I mean, just try getting through to anybody. that knows there's a sprinkler in the city. Forget it. But you actually call up a person with a name, that sprinkler, I know, is fixed within a couple of days. I just know. That's the new standard. This is part of the history of seceding that took us from the east to the west. This is the history of the Mormons. This is the history of all the intentional communities, which were actually utopian communities. This is in the tradition of that. And if you think your homeowners association documents are some kind of gross thing, it's in the tradition of American idealistic utopian government. Problem is they're always administering stupid things. Like, your dog can't weigh more than 20 pounds. You're going to mow your lawn, or the shutters have to be red, or some, all this oppressive stuff. But the same mechanism can actually be, it's just government by contract. You contract into it. And because it's a contract, because it's not mandatory, you don't have to live there if you don't like it, it can be much more precise than municipal government. And there's actually case law that says you can't pass a law of precision. Even you can hardly ever pass even an architectural code in a downtown, because the theory is that people have not selected that, they have actually bought into it. Excuse me, they were born into it. So they didn't have a choice. But in this case, you contract into it. So it's very important to understand that we have all the mechanisms, we have all the financing to do it. And it's an intentional community, and it gives you that amenity, that theme that good communities have, like, for example, like golf. Okay? 14% of the people in the golf course community play golf more than once a year. And yet you pay for the clubhouse, you pay for the view, etc. This is an intentional community of this type. Ag is the new golf. Okay, that's one way to think about it. Ag is the new golf. It takes care of your gray water, it gives you the long views, it gives you the gathering place, the intention of the gathering place. But instead of having all the bad odor of golf, there's something wrong with golf in environmentalist eyes. I don't know whether it's the pollution or what it is, or the lawn, but there's something very right about actually growing your food. And this is the edge, this is the crinkly edge. The peri-urban edge where most of the activity takes place. That street is what you saw. And notice that there's the big farm, this is the tractor farm, but the farmer still participates in the society. They're not out there. And then embedded in it is the 15-acre farm, right, where you can grow orchard, for example. It doesn't require tractors like that. And they too are embedded on the street. And then there are the little ones like this. And these are quite interesting because these actually can grow serious food here. But some people hesitate and say, serious food, what if it's too much work? Or what? These are more cooperatives in the sense that you have your yard, right? But if one year you want to opt out and say, I'm going to Spain, or I'm tired, or I broke my leg, or whatever it is, or I'm bored, somebody will take over and actually grow it for you. So this is not, you see, it's not directly associated with your house. It is a little separated from the house, so you can actually opt in or out. You can either do the work yourself or pay somebody to do it. But these are large enough. These are half acres that are large enough to be productive. And then there is all the types of food growing that takes place on the ground, which I'll show you, and then all the type of food growing that takes place off the ground, in balconies, roofs, and boxes. And that's the full declension of growing food. It's keyed, of course, to density. Okay? This is one of the ends. This is a detail, and there's several things I need to point out. This, of course, is the market square that I'll show you later, and this is the farming. These are the barns and so forth. And this is the water, which, by the way, we've widened the canals, not only for aesthetic reasons, the existing canals, but so that actually you can have tilapia and catfish. Wonderful source of protein. You buy them in buckets, you put them in, 6 weeks, 2 months later, you harvest protein, you send little Johnny fishing for dinner. Okay, by the way, that sells real estate. You have a little rendering of Johnny, with a fishing coil that says Johnny getting dinner. And I always say, if you can't sell real estate with that picture, you can't sell real estate. Do not go into the business. Because you can't, how can you resist, that kind of lifestyle for your kids? But this is important. This is labor. This is nice looking, affordable housing. I'm very interested in designing this kind of thing. And these are the gardens for, in fact, what essentially are Central American laborers. Okay, these are the people that they build this, they build the community, they maintain the community, but they remain there, not only for all their terrific usefulness, but they actually have their own gardens. They don't only work on your garden, they have their own gardens. And because people south of the border, they know two things. They know how to build and they know how to grow food. They actually know those two things terrifically. This is the R&D. If your tomatoes aren't growing, if things are falling over, if you have a problem, come to the R&D lab where you have people that actually know what they're doing. And everybody agrees that this is absolutely essential to the place. You know, the professor from Sawasan University is not going to teach you when your tomato keels over, or when it didn't grow, or when you planted the wrong thing. All these guys are. So this is an integral part of it. And by the way, the way we present it is, do the nice thing, you know, these are nice, you know, these affordable housing. No, excuse me, this is not affordable housing. This is integral to your lifestyle choice, and it makes your life better. Okay, which is the new urbanist argument. Hardly ever do we ask you to do the right thing for ethical reasons. You know, you do the right thing because it actually works better. It works better. And some people like to say it also sells more real estate. But just working better is good enough. This is the town square. Right here. Okay? It's on the peri-urban crinkly street. This is the town square, and it consists of the following. First of all, there are the barns. Now, if you read Michael Pollan and you learn about manure, you need to have cows. Okay, the case he makes is you need it all. You need cows and you need chickens to grow your crops. Okay, it is a symbiotic relationship. Cows are a bit of the problem. You need a barn. Barns don't often fit. So here's where you have the barns. Here's where you have the goats. Here's where you have the roosters. So you can bring your chickens to for dates right here. This, of course, on the main street is the farmer's market, properly designed so that the truck backs into it. Okay, don't make them hump, heavy stuff. Anybody who's seen a farmer's market? You come to the back. Over here is a very interesting building. This building was specifically designed to do the processing of the food that actually adds value. That's where the kitchens are for canning things. That you bring the strawberry in, it comes out. By the way, important, you have licensed slaughterhouse back here, because you can't do it at home anymore. You can't kill your pet chicken. You have to bring it somewhere. But over here is the kitchen where you cook. This is also the place where you do the cooking school, and you teach urbanism, and you teach other things, not just cooking. And by the way, the surplus that is always created, you always have to grow more than you can eat or do. In case there's failure, you have to sell it, and you sell it by having that restaurant I spoke about before that actually follows the seasons. And this I've seen with my own eyes. I've seen farmers that do exactly this. I have seen this building and how it works exactly like that. By the way, it's also the market. You can also go buy vegetables there, etc., and canned goods and so forth that are provided for convenience. This is the University of Sawasan building. They're going to build there. Classrooms on the first floor and kids' rooms on top. And the kids like volunteering and learning with their own hands. And over here is the public building of the market town, which is the barn. The barn is a terrific thing. Everybody loves the barn. It's the meeting hall. It's the dance hall. It's where you learn judo. It's where you judge cattle. And by the way, it's a lot less expensive to build than the usual clubhouse, golf clubhouse. It's more simple. By the way, extraordinary thing I found out: whenever you have a rural building, you don't need to have insulation. You're exempted from all the hideousness of all the green codes that assume you're going to have air conditioning. So they go ahead and and then they actually cause you to create tremendous high-tech sandwiches of stuff that then mildew if you ever open a window. Okay, and the great thing about rural architecture is rules suspended. So there's a whole architecture that develops with much more dignity because of this. And then of course on the main street you have the live work units where other people sell things. Now let's talk about this market square. Everything changed with these three crises. I look back and I'm just amazed that our new urbanist communities created their social centers at the town square dependent on shopping. Okay, shopping and buying food and buying restaurants. What were we thinking about? Now it just feels so gross. Like, what were you thinking? People are going to go out there, they will only hang around there when you have shops. This sets it up completely differently. This is not a shopping square, this is a market square. This is where food is produced. produced. This is where things are produced, not consumed. Okay, very different proposition, very 21st century. And it's a totally different thing. It costs less for the developer. However, the management is fantastically, it's just as hard. It's just as hard to manage a farm as it is a set of shops. Michael Abelman, those of you who may know him, by the way, he's written books, you should get them, they're really great. Michael Abelman is the calmest person you've ever met. And when he speaks about farming, he says, this is hard, it requires unbelievable management, and you basically have to be a genius to do it. There are so many variables that you're completely, so this has to be provided. By the way, people who run managers of shopping malls are also geniuses of a different type. But they're geniuses, and you need that kind of thing. You need to allocate food growing genius. And he says, this has to be top down. You know, if we're going to sell this food, and we can get contracts with all the with all the hotels and all the restaurants, but we have to dependably deliver what they need. Therefore, people who sign up for this, who live here by contract, I'm going to tell you, we need 3 rows of tomatoes on Monday. And I'm going to tell you, we need 3 rows of tomatoes on Tuesday, 3 rows of tomatoes Wednesday. You know, and by the way, you're doing squash on Thursday, Friday, just like that. You're having little lettuces. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We can't have surpluses and all these things. And you know how that makes sense, right? When we said, ooh, we're going to lose some sales. You know, people aren't going to need to do that. And we said, okay, well, there's going to be 2 ways. You have 2 types of contracts here. You actually belong to the co-op where you do what you're told, you know, and I mean do what you're told, you know, when you use the water, you know, when you get the tractor and everything, or you're on your own. You can also be just a free contractor. But if you're the co-op, we will get rid of the food. And you may make money or not, but at least you won't have an embarrassing pile of rotting stuff. Okay, that's all we guarantee. Mostly you'll make money, but at least you won't have the pile of rotting stuff and spend all your free time trying to give it away when nobody wants it. Now, if you don't want to belong to that, that's fine. Grow whatever you want, but you're on your own. And so the association, there are 2 types of relationships to intellectual, and that's important to know. That took a long time to arrive at that. So this is what's happening here. This is administrative, etc. Very important town center. One other thing, I showed this slide. This is high ground. Remember, we took the farm ditches. The farmer, believe it or not, didn't have a pond that looked like that. It actually looked horrible. You know, it's whatever he did when he was drunk with his backhoe. You know, the usual farmer aesthetic. Very macho. That doesn't sell real estate. You have to, virtually everything the farmer does, that little ditch, you know, that drinking tank, none of it looks good enough for modern real estate. Don't get romantic about it. You still need a landscape architect to come and redesign it. Okay? And there's no reason why it can't look good. Okay? There is no reason, and we're not in this ethical thing about having, you know, we're not Calvinists. We're not the kind of ethical environmentalists that say it has to look bad to be virtuous. That doesn't sell real estate. We actually use sandpaper or lumber, you know, which was never used in the 60s. This intercepts the water coming down from the hillside of the town of Sawasan. It settles here, and here it's stored, and then it comes down like that. It's also the entry feature, you know, quite frankly. But I show you this because everything has to be rethought. Farming is actually rather ugly a lot of the time. A lot of the time, if they don't put things away, fields are fallow and so forth, and you really have to try just a bit harder because actually the feedback is that it really doesn't look quite good enough if you do it any other way. Now, what about the housing? We established experimental housing from the largest to the smallest. Each block, by the way, is an acre. The acre is the measure of everything you read about farming. You know, yield per acre, number of this by acre. So we said, let's just make things easy, and the block is an acre. And then we have different densities from rural to urban, and it's like this. Okay, there's the 1 acre farm. Notice it's in the corner. The fields are in fact on everything. The building is always in the northeast. The sunlight is in the southwest. So you begin getting an asymmetrical urbanism. So this is the 1 acre farm, by the way, and we have the metrics of this in terms of yield and the economics of it and so forth. What you're going to have to do it. And by the way, it mostly dissuades you from ever owning an acre. Once you read what it's about, you say, excuse me, include me out. Do you have anything smaller? And then there's the 1/2 acre, with its performance, and then you have the quarter acre. Okay? And then you have the 16 units per acre, which you can barely still have the yard on the ground. You know, we did the solar, and you can still have the yard on the ground. Notice how you get streets that have the buildings on them and streets that have the yards on them. You start getting an asymmetrical urbanism. Now, if you're going to be a mess, we warn you, get a street that has the yard in the back. Get a house with a yard in the back. But you can also have a choice of a street with a yard in the front. Now, what's the yard in the front about? It's very important that you understand that in the end, we're still new urbanists and we're doing this for social cohesion. Okay, we want the sense of community to be restored. That's why the porches became so famous in new urbanism. Now, in retrospect, the porches were a failure. Americans do not know how to do leisure. Okay, they sit in the rocking chair and they have to talk to each other. It's a couple. It's like Liz and I. It says, "Can you sit for 5 more minutes?" Okay, we don't feel comfortable in leisure. Okay, but when you have a yard in the back, in the front, you can stand with a hoe like this. Exactly nothing for as long as you want. Feeling great. I'm here on the garden with my hoe, ready to talk to you about the tomato, ready to socialize. And there's a book on this, how sociable the front garden is. And it absolutely is. And everybody who's ever had one says it's exactly like you say. It's better than a dog or a baby. People will come up and talk about tomatoes. What happened? How did it go? What did you plant? What species did you do? What's up? Did the crickets get it? You know? And so sociability is an afterburner. The reason I'm mentioning this is there's something incredibly integrated about this. This is not an add-on. Agricultural urbanism is not an add-on. It is integral to everything we're interested in, including the sociability, including the environmentalists, including not driving around, including not spending money stupidly. It all makes sense, and including, by the way, making a rational decision about how much land you want. Because the more you buy, the more you're punished. It's just built in. Virtue is built in. It's a wonderful theological system. And then you have townhouses at 16 units to the acre. By the way, at 32 units to the acre, you go to the roof garden. Problem with this is you have a garden on the roof. Okay, if you don't want it, also at 32 units to the acre, 21, you can actually have the communal garden. This is the allotment garden, which is not exactly, you go over and do it somewhere else. And this is different characteristics, different social characteristics, much more sociable to be in the community garden. And I went to visit one in Sweden, in Lund, the first one in Europe. It had its 100th anniversary, and I asked all about it. And people were in tears of happiness because they had houses. These have little houses. If you live in an apartment, you also get to build a little country house. By the way, it doesn't have to meet any code known to man, because it's just a tool shed. But people inhabit it the entire weekend happily. And there are 2 rules that are important that I saw that I'll never forget. One is that you can't have electricity. And that absolutely polices its performance in terms of noise, in terms of the inspector coming to get you. And so at night, where you can sleep, it's candles and cooking by the fire. It is so beautiful. You walk at night and you think it's magic. You say, this is what the medieval villages must have been like. So beautiful. And the other thing that I love is there is no water to each allotment. There's one fountain. And you use a watering can. And I said, why do you do that? Because first of all, so you don't waste water, because you know the weight of it, but also you socialize more. You're continually going out, taking the room into the place where you pick up the water. And by the way, obviously there are bathrooms there as well. You know, because they don't have bathrooms. So the whole thing, and that kind of subtlety, that kind of know-how, a century of know-how, you can build in thanks to the homeowners association. And of course we're going to get it wrong and eventually we're going to get it right. But that's the kind of level of concern that is active here. And then you can also have, this is a kind of allotment garden which is within the condominium, within the block. And I don't know this so well, I've seen them. Of course, we all know this one. This is more rare. They're also in Germany. I don't know its performance. But I do know that it's not immediately outside your unit. Okay, you have a walkway, so you can choose not to have the garden. I think that's one of the important sort of switches that you make. I actually want to live here, but not really have a garden. And then finally, this very interesting invention, which is this is the only true innovation, which is the balcony garden. That actually has been discovered that the little balcony, 6 and 8 feet, really isn't big enough. You can't walk around this stuff, it just doesn't work right. You can't throw the tool. So you have deeper balconies where you can really do stuff, you can really activate, and because to get the sunlight in, there's skip-stop balconies. You see? This is a 5-story building with 3 balconies, and the balconies are every other story because they're deeper and the sunlight comes in. And this, for example, is one of the things you can do about architecture. There's an architecture that actually can respond to this that looks differently, and not because it's a style or something, it's just because it actually has, there's a functional basis for a new kind of apartment building, and as you can see, it faces south, right? The balconies are only on one side, the breeze goes through, the elevator delivers you into it, etc. All of this stuff is not, for a good architect, this is what they live for, is working out the social implications of this kind of building. And then what we do in these charrettes is we give these models to actually separate architects. These are by different architects working on the rules. And then the developer says, take this one further, like this one right here, these L-shaped units. And then they do like this. And these are L-shaped units for retired people, in which the small master bedroom units in the first floor with their own little garden, each one sociable, like that. And it looks like this. Okay, so everything gets taken to a different level. You have to get it there. Interesting things about these markets, they work better when they actually are distributed among towns. So see that farmer's market we showed? That farmer's market would probably be open only 2 days a week. And the same farmers would go to another town with another farmer's market for another day and another day. And that's how they make a living. That's what they do in Europe. And because of that, that's the reason they don't need supermarkets. You get fantastic goods, but they go, most farmers markets in Europe have contracts with 5 and 6 towns, and they travel a day certain. And the towns don't have, they simply don't have supermarkets all over southern France. So we learn about that, and then in England we introduced this. This is the village version that we designed from England, and you can say it goes urban to rural, the same way. You see urban to rural. This is a particular type of English village that has a lake in the middle. They have a heath in the middle, or a green, and then the apartment buildings, and then the gardens, and then the larger holdings, and eventually the farm holdings at the end. And then this is another way to sell real estate. This is pretty interesting. This is in North Florida. And in this one, the way the funds are being raised for this real estate is as follows. Okay? Each of these is 8 acres. I'm sorry, each of these is 4 acres. I said 8 earlier, but it's 4. Okay? And instead of getting an investor to say, give me $200,000, and I'll give you a piece of paper, and you're an investor, and you can make a profit when I do. You say, give me $200,000, and you get 4 acres pre-zoned and ready to go, in which you can build up to 8 houses. So you become a sub-developer. You actually make your small farming settlement with whoever you want. You can do your friends that you retire with. You can do it with your children who can't get jobs after college. You can get whatever you want. You can have the old commune revived. And what the person does, you can fund this entire project by selling this many lots. This raises the money required to pay off the debt and pay off the infrastructure, just this much. And you've also actually convinced, I think, 14 people, each of which to sell 8 lots. And as they sell the 8 lots, they can make the profit, which everything rides up. It's an absolutely brilliant way to sell real estate in this market. And so you take one of these, and it's like this. Okay, this is your 4 acres. By the way, they all have a pond dug by the developer. These are country roads. A lot of the infrastructure, by the way, is very light on the infrastructure because a lot of the roads are actually built within the 4 acres by, in fact, the homestead themselves. So they come in and they start with a weekend house from Atlanta, just like this, and they begin farming, and they put the catfish hatchlings in, and then they say, I love it, and I retire and I get a real house, and the farmer's back here, maybe I get somebody to help me with the labor, and then my 2 kids didn't make it, they're in college, so we're going to put them here. So instead of the indignity of living 5 to 1 apartment in some horrible place looking for a job, they can look for a job right here and help Dad in the meantime. And then my old new urbanist buddies, I can bring them in because nobody will listen to my stories anymore. and you can begin. And then, you know, my mother-in-law, my wife has exactly the same situation I have. I've got to bring their family in, and it's all circling the wagons, you see. So what happens is the world gets tougher because of climate change and so forth. You actually start making a society. Now, this is a level of intervention that most Americans are no longer given. First of all, most of us don't get to design our houses anymore. That incredible pleasure that those who've done it know what it is to be involved in the design of your own house is restored. But also, no one gets to design their own intentional community anymore. The community you want, laid out how you want, with the people you want, to be surrounded by people that make sense for you, particularly into retirement. So this introduces an entire way of actually building, which, by the way, is nowhere in the market. There is no competition. And it happens to raise real estate without talking to a single banker. And so it goes. And there are two things we're doing, and by the way, an architecture associated with it. And we now have a small business retrofitting golf course communities into ag. This is one of them. So we did it once wrong, now we get paid to do it again right. And this is in Mexico. For American retirees, this is San Miguel de Allende. And this family owns, this is wrong, this is actually water here. That's the drinking. The family owns an ancient farm. They're beginning to do McMansions here. And they saw the first three, and they hated it. So they said, we've got to do something else. They heard about this urbanism, they came in. And first of all, we designed it as a golf course community. That's what it looks like. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Obviously, we put the urbanism somewhere. I mean, it's a nice golf course community, it's urban and so forth. But then we do the farming. Now notice this. See how this is laid out? These are 8 people that can actually take on the agriculture or not, depending. If they don't want to do it, this person takes care of it. But they all have the same long views at the back as the golf course would give them. So you can actually manage it or not. And so there's this as a model, and then there's this as a model, which is just a bigger increment, but also this has more urbanism. This actually has little settings like this. So these are the options, because we don't know what works, and we're learning. And by the way, these are not like farms. These are not like villages. This is a new type of real estate. That's why it's called agricultural urbanism. You know, it's a new type of real estate that we're exploring. And then there's this one at the intersection. So the developer chooses to do this one. He likes the little intersections of the streets, you know, the 4 houses clustered, and we say, so we go with this one, and then we do it different ways. Do you prefer it this way, or do you prefer it this way, or do you prefer it this way, or do you prefer it this way? Okay? And this is what the downtown looks like for its color. Courtyard buildings was just a little bit of growing. And of course, people here fishing for all the tilapias and catfish. By the way, in a very Venetian way, because you know what happens to an agricultural pond? The EPA isn't coming and telling you to stay 30 feet away from it. So you can actually build buildings right into it as if you were in Venice. You can fish off your backyard. Another thing that they've banned, you know, the minute you make water, building has to be 30 feet away. Why? So you just, well, instead of arguing with the EPA, you just say, well, this isn't water. You know, this is a, whatever, invent something else that they can't manage. And then this is the intersection. This is an intersection of, you know, with 4 of these rather grand American retirement houses, you know, with their hinterland of farming beyond. So that's where we're at. And by the way, this is a module that gets fed into the smart code. The smart code is the fundamental code that has the transit zones, and every specialist, their modules, you know, as I said, from this chicken module to the wildfire module, etc., that you can actually, it just plugs right in. It's like the app for an iPhone. And we're now writing an agricultural app that would enable this. And I want to tell you that the best code in poultry so far is Cleveland. You can do a research very easily, who has chicken codes, and it's going to be based on the Cleveland material. So that's it. Thank you.
Who knows what this will cause? We know already from what happened earlier today that there's going to be some changes in Waller County and some changes in Washington County and Austin County just because of this speech. Oh, Peter Brown. Peter Brown, I have to give him a hand here. He's the one who invented this concept. help us get it done.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I didn't hear the whole lecture tonight, but I'm going to get the rest of it. And I think the important message here is, you tell me, Andres, we need choices in our society. The way it's organized now, we have very limited choices. And I think this is one choice that you can have out in the countryside. And in the city, we need a lot of other choices, a lot of other settings. And I'm hoping that I'll have something to say about that in our great city of Houston. Thank you.
20 minutes is really awful, and we're absolutely on the same page in terms of what needs to be done. So I'm very excited.